I've been teaching college-level theology courses for the past 10 years, which means I've read thousands of theology papers. And I've noticed something. The same theology mistakes pop up over and over again. So today I'm giving you the top 5 red flags to help you spot bad theology before it messes with your faith. Red flag 1, it's all about you, not about God. And this one is sneaky because it sounds good. Like, it feels good and it's incredibly popular. But if a message, sermon, book, YouTube video on Christian faith makes you the main character instead of God, that's a red flag. How many times have you heard a sermon on Jeremiah 29:11? And it goes something like, God knows the plans he has for you. He's going to prosper you. The waymaker is in the business of making ways, or some other alliteration. But that's not the context of the verse. The verse was written to Israel while they were in exile. God was saying, hey, you're going to be in Babylon for 70 years, but I'm not going to forget you. So this red flag starts to show up when you hear things like, what you magnify, you get more of. When you're hungry for the blessing, you'll do whatever it takes to get it. If you keep saying, I can't, God can't either. And these are 3 real-life examples from the names of pastors you would probably know. But here's the thing. That's not the gospel. The Bible isn't about us using God to get the life we want. It's about God redeeming us for His glory. When we flip the script and make Christianity all about our happiness, we are setting ourselves up for disappointment. Because God's not a genie, He's the King. And this kind of bad theology is dangerous. Because when life gets hard, and it will, you'll start wondering, did God fail me? Did I not have enough faith? But the truth is, God never promised to make life easy. He promised to be with us through it. I had just graduated college, and I graduated during the economic crisis of '08. I had sent my resume to, at this time, over 500 churches all over the US, and I couldn't get a job. And I will never forget, it's pouring rain in Florida, one of those random rains, pull into a gas station, and I'm not too big into Christian radio, but I was listening to Christian radio, and a song came on by Casting Crowns. And I don't know what the song is called, but it was something along the lines of like, praise you in this storm. And it is storming outside. And I am literally in tears because I'm like, God, I just graduated from a ministry school. I got my bachelor's degree in practical theology. Like, I want to do your work. And yet I can't land a job. I recently was, the girl I had been dating for a couple years broke up with me. Like, everything just felt like it was falling apart. Nothing seemed like it was working. But I can remember being in my old beat up Toyota Avalon at that gas station in the middle of Bushnell County. And while that song is playing, I can hear the voice of God, not audibly, but in my heart, Jordan, I've not forgotten about you. It's not about you. It's about me. And that gave me the courage and the strength to continue on. Because when we make faith or the Bible all about us, we will inevitably experience disappointment. And we may not have the strength to overcome it. So what do you do when you hear this red flag? I want to give you 3 simple steps to follow. First, ask yourself, does this teaching focus more on me or on God? Second, check the whole Bible. Does this match what Jesus actually taught or just what I want to hear? And third, test it. And here's the test. If this message doesn't work for a suffering Christian in another country, it's probably not biblical theology. All right, red flag number 2. There's a huge difference between letting Scripture shape our beliefs and shaping Scripture to fit what we already believe. And this happens all the time. Someone grabs just one verse and then builds an entire theology around it without checking who wrote it, who it was written for, or what the actual passage meant in its context. Big example of this is Philippians 4:13. This might come as a shock. Brace yourself. But Paul wasn't talking about sports. He was talking about suffering and learning to be content whether he had a lot or he had nothing at all. And we can't understand Philippians 4:13 without the context of verse 12. And so the context of this verse, it's about being content when things are good and content when things are bad. And here's why this is so dangerous. If you believe a twisted version of Scripture, you'll start doubting God when things don't work out the way you expected. But God didn't fail you. The real problem becomes he never promised what that preacher, book, blog said in the first place. So what do you do when you hear this? First, check the context. Ask yourself, who wrote this book of the Bible? Who was it written to? What's actually happening in this passage? Second, compare Scripture with Scripture. The Bible never contradicts itself. It interprets itself. Third, if a verse sounds too good to be true, read the entire chapter before assuming what it really means. And here's the thing. Bad theology isn't always loud and obvious. A lot of times it's subtle. It might sound almost right until you realize it's slowly leading you away from the truth. And that's why spotting these red flags isn't optional, it's essential. And if you don't know how to recognize them, you might not even realize when they're subversively shaping your beliefs. And this next one, it's one of the most widespread lies in modern Christianity, and it's wrecking people's faith. Red flag number 3. And this one is super sneaky. It's when preachers say things like, your life is a product of the seeds you've sown. Favor ain't fair, it changes the rules of the game. If you stay in faith and keep a good attitude, God will take you places you never dreamed. All of these, again, are from very famous pastors. And if you ask me who they are, I'm not going to say. But let's get real. Jesus never promised any of that. In fact, he told us something completely different. Faith isn't a magic formula to get what we want. It's about trusting God even when life gets really tough. Because when we're promised an easy, trouble-free life, we're setting ourselves up for heartbreak when reality hits. Now, it doesn't mean we can't have a wonderful life. Absolutely you can. But it's not coming through name it and claim it and blab it and grab it. Faith isn't a formula. It's a person, Jesus. First, check if the Bible actually promises it. There are a ton of promises in the Bible. But if God never promised wealth, health, or an easy life as a guarantee, don't expect it'll just magically happen because you'll be crushed when life is hard. Second, look at Jesus' life as the ultimate example. The Son of God lived a life of struggle and sacrifice. If that's the pattern, why would we assume everything will just be easy? Third, test the message against Scripture. Dive into the Gospels to see if the promise aligns with the overall narrative of a faithful yet challenging walk with God. Because bad theology that overpromises isn't just misleading. It wrecks people's faith when they inevitably hit the valleys of life. Red flag number 4. Let's talk about this one. When someone tells you you're not a real Christian unless you do X, Y, and Z, and those X, Y, and Zs aren't even in Scripture, then you're looking at legalism. Now, don't get me wrong, spiritual disciplines are awesome for growing closer to God. But when every aspect of your life is reduced to a checklist that supposedly makes you holier, that's when you're missing the point. Christianity isn't about earning favor through a strict rule book. Instead, it's about receiving grace and living out a relationship with Jesus. And when we start adding extra rules, we risk turning into legalistic Pharisees rather than free, grace-filled followers of Christ. So what do you do if you hear this? Well, first ask, where does the Bible actually say this? And if the requirement isn't found in Scripture, don't let it become a standard for your faith. Second, remember that salvation is by grace. It's not about ticking boxes or following just a ritualistic routine. It's about a personal relationship with Jesus. Third, reflect on the freedom Christ offers. Take a step back and see if the rule is meant to help you, or is it a man-made tradition that burdens rather than liberates? Because when extra rules start weighing you down, they can smother the joy of knowing Christ. And if you think that's bad, wait until you hear the last red flag. Because even technically correct theology can lead you astray. Number 5. And this one's a bit tricky. Sometimes the theology you hear might be technically correct. But here's the catch. If it doesn't lead you any closer to Jesus, it's time to re-examine your theology. Think about 1 Corinthians 13. It reminds us that if we have all the knowledge in the world, but we lack love, we gain nothing. So if your study of theology is turning you into a know-it-all or making you overly judgmental, something is probably off. Because the point of theology isn't to win arguments. It's not to boast about how smart you are and that you can pronounce infralapsarianism, but probably not spell it. It's to know God more deeply, to be transformed into a person of genuine love and humility. And if your theology isn't drawing you closer to Christ and his heart, you're probably missing the mark. So what do you do if you hear this? First, ask yourself if this teaching is making you more loving and humble. Because genuine theology transforms you, not just your opinions. Second, reflect on the purpose of your faith. Are you growing in love and service or just in knowledge? And third, compare with the example of Jesus. His teachings, his actions were always rooted in deep compassion and humility, qualities that should be the hallmark of any true theological understanding. Bad theology is sneaky, because it sounds good at first, but if we're not careful, it can slowly take us away from the real gospel. And as we've seen, these red flags are not just abstract ideas. They're real dangers that can lead us away from the heart of God's message. Whether it's over-promising miracles, making it all about us, or enforcing some man-made rules, bad theology is subversive and it will shape our faith and life. That's why it's essential to know the Bible, test every teaching against Scripture, and always ask, does this make much of Jesus? I want to hear from you. What's the worst example of bad theology you've encountered? Drop your stories in the comments below.